Welcome, everyone, to a captivating exploration of folklore and legend. Today, we embark on a journey together. We will delve into a tale of mystery and intrigue. Without further ado, let's step into the shadows of this story.
Recap of Episode 1. The season begins. In the bustling heart of 18th century London, the Winslow family is caught in the intricate dance of societal expectations and personal ambitions. The matriarch, Mrs. Emmeline Winslow, is determined to secure a prosperous match for her eldest daughter, Eliza, as the social season approaches. Meanwhile, her husband, Mr. Winslow, struggles with mounting debts and a growing dependence on alcohol, casting a shadow over their household. Eliza Winslow, a vision of grace and poise, is eager yet apprehensive about her debut. Her younger sister, Mary, is full of youthful exuberance, while her older brother Henry remains aloof, his previous season marred by unsuccessful attempts to find a suitable bride. The Winslow family's fortunes rest on Eliza's shoulders, and the pressure is palpable. Meanwhile, the enigmatic Duke of Wiltshire's heir, Mr. Percy, returns to London, stirring curiosity and speculation among the elite. His mysterious presence and the rumours of scandalous affairs abroad add an air of intrigue to the social season. As the episode concludes, Eliza prepares for the impending ball, the weight of her family's expectations heavy upon her. Little does she know that the dance of intrigue and deception is just beginning, and the secrets of the past threaten to unravel the fragile fabric of their lives. Whispers of Oakwood Lane, Episode 2, Intrigue and Deception. As Mrs. Winslow prepared herself for Lady Fairchild's ball, she finds herself thinking back on the earlier events of today. In the quaint house adjacent to the Winslow residence dwelled the Harringtons, a family of equal aspirations but of a slightly higher station. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, with their daughter Amelia, awaited the upcoming season with great anticipation, much like the Winslow. However, beneath the facade of neighbourly civility lay a web of hidden agendas and whispered secrets. This afternoon, Mrs. Harrington invited Mrs. Winslow for tea, the Harringtons' drawing room, lavishly decorated with elegant furnishings. Mrs. Harrington, regal and poised, welcomes Mrs. Winslow, her demeanour a facade of cordiality.
"Ah, Mrs. Winslow, what a pleasure to have you join me for tea on this fine afternoon."
Mrs. Harrington gestures gracefully, indicating for Mrs. Winslow to take a seat on a plush settee adorned with embroidered cushions.
"Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. Your drawing room is as charming as ever."
The two women exchange polite smiles, masking an underlying tension that belies their outward civility.
"Pray tell, how fares your family in these exciting times leading up to the season? I hear your daughter Eliza is anticipating her debut."
Mrs. Harrington cooed, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups.
"Indeed, Eliza is eager to make her mark. We are hopeful of securing a suitable match."
The mention of Eliza's debut hangs in the air, an unspoken challenge between the two households.
"Ah, yes, the season brings much anticipation. One must ensure the best prospects, especially in such trying times."
Mrs. Harrington's gaze flickered toward Amelia, who sat demurely nearby.
"Amelia is quite looking forward to her debut. It is imperative that we secure a match of suitable standing."
As the conversation flowed, Mrs. Harrington's eyes gleamed with a secretive knowing, a hint of amusement playing on her lips. She leaned closer, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "Speaking of prospects, my dear Mrs. Winslow, one cannot help but wonder. Tell me, have you heard the latest gossip about Mr. Winslow?" Mrs. Winslow's expression falters slightly, betraying a hint of unease.
"Gossip? What do you mean?"
Mrs. Harrington's smile widened a glint of mischief in her eyes.
"Oh, just idle chatter, my dear, but one hears whispers of financial troubles and overdue debts."
Mrs. Winslow's facade remained unbroken, though her mind raced with the implications. The Harringtons were well informed, perhaps too well. How much did they truly know?
"I assure you, Mrs. Harrington, our affairs are well managed."
Mrs. Harrington smirking.
"Of course, my dear, though I dare say one hears whispers that not all debts are settled in due time."
Mrs. Harrington's eyes gleam mischievously as she sips her tea. Mrs. Winslow, maintaining her composure.
Rumours are often unfounded, Mrs. Harrington. One mustn't lend ear to idle gossip.
The tension between them is palpable, as Mrs. Harrington changes the subject, a playful glint in her eye.
And speaking of gossip, do tell me, how is dear Master Henry?
Mrs. Harrington teased lightly.
Last season proved rather uneventful in terms of matrimonial pursuits, did it not?
Mrs. Winslow's demeanour stiffens momentarily before she responds, her tone tinged with subtle defiance.
Every season brings its own surprises, does it not?
Mrs. Winslow replied smoothly, her voice laced with subtle defiance.
Henry possesses a discerning nature. He will not rush into alliances merely for the sake of appearances.
Amelia observed the exchange with keen interest, her gaze flitting between her mother and Mrs. Winslow's. The air in the room grew palpably tense, the unsaid truths lingering beneath the surface. Mrs. Harrington's smile tightened imperceptibly, her gaze briefly flickering with a shadow of vulnerability.
You speak as if understanding a son's temperament, Mrs. Winslow,
she remarked, her voice laced with a tinge of bitterness.
Ah, well, boys can be quite unpredictable in matters of courtship, but perhaps you wouldn't understand, not having a son of your own.
The remark is laced with a hint of veiled reproach, causing Mrs. Harrington's smile to falter momentarily. Everyone is fully aware of Mr. Harrington's disappointment, because on the day Amelia was born, when the doctor emerged from the room to announce to Mr. Harrington that he had a daughter, his face fell as if his life was ending. A girl. What use is a girl? Mr. Harrington expressed while he walked out of the room. Mrs. Harrington, regaining composure.
Indeed, each family faces unique challenges, yet I am confident this season will bring better fortune for both our households.
The conversation continues, a delicate dance of veiled barbs and forced pleasantries, each woman concealing her true intentions. As Mrs. Winslow prepares to take her leave, Mrs. Harrington's eyes linger on her departing guest, a glint of determination in her gaze. Behind the facade of neighbourly decorum, darker motives lurk, hinting at revelations that could spell trouble for the Winslow family. A cold wind enters through the window, bringing Mrs. Winslow back in the present. She takes a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenges ahead. With each passing moment, Mrs. Winslow's resolve strengthens. She must protect her family at all costs, even if it means confronting the shadows of the past. The Winslow drawing room, adorned with a soft candlelight. Eliza, dressed in a dazzling gown, sits anxiously on a settee, her eyes flickering towards the staircase.
Honestly, Henry, Mother is taking forever to get ready. We'll be late to the ball at this rate.
Henry, seated nearby in a tailored coat, chuckles softly.
Patience, Eliza. You know how Mother fusses over her appearance for these events.
Eliza's impatience grows evident as she fidgets with her fan.
But we can't afford to be fashionably late tonight. There are so many eligible gentlemen I must meet.
Henry smiled and said to her in a teasing voice,
Gentlemen, or one in particular?
With an exaggerated blinking Eliza frown, creating a slight indication of her displeasure with his statement.
Honestly, brother, one would think you are above raillery.
Suddenly, footsteps approached from the hallway, and Eliza and Henry exchanged expectant glances. As Eliza whispers,
Ah, finally, Mother is coming down.
To their surprise, their father, Mr. Winslow, enters the drawing room instead, his expression tired and dishevelled. Eliza, startled.
Papa, where's... Mother? We thought you were her.
Mr. Winslow's demeanour is sombre as he meets Eliza's gaze. Mr. Winslow.
Your mother will be down shortly.
And I see you are not dressed. Will you not be joining us this evening?
Eliza asks in a concerned voice.
I am afraid not, dear.
Disappointment is palpable as she stands, hands clasped together. Eliza.
But father, the ball is our chance to find a suitable match, and surely you know your present is important, and besides, you promised to assist.
Mr. Winslow's gaze softens with regret. Mr. Winslow.
I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm not in the mood for such affairs tonight.
Eliza's frustration simmers as she confronts her father.
This is important, father. You're letting us down.
Henry, feeling tensed from the moment his father entered the room, wishes he had a glass of gin, but Mrs. Winslow had banned all alcohol drink from the house in a desperate attempt to stop Mr. Winslow from drinking, interjects with a calm tone.
Eliza, perhaps Father has other matters to attend to. We shouldn't pressure him.
Eliza, exasperated.
Other matters. Father, You've been absent and disinterested for weeks. We hardly see you anymore, and when we do, you're always...
Eliza pauses, her voice trembling with emotion.
Drinking.
Mr. Winslow's eyes betray a mix of guilt and resignation. I know, Eliza, I've been preoccupied, but please understand, I have my reasons. Eliza, frustrated.
Reasons. Reasons. What reasons could justify neglecting your own family?
The room falls silent, tension thick in the air. Eliza.
You used to care, Father. You used to be there for us. Now it feels like we're strangers in our own home.
Mr. Winslow's shoulders slump, his demeanour heavy with regret.
I'm sorry, Eliza. Things haven't been easy lately, but I promise I'll do better.
Eliza, determined.
It's not just about tonight, Father. It's about our future, my future. I need you to be present.
Henry watches quietly, his expression reflective. Henry.
Eliza's right, Father. We need your support, especially now.
The weight of Eliza's words hangs in the air as Mr. Winslow meets his daughter's gaze, a glimmer of resolve in his eyes. Eliza's resolve remains unwavering. Eliza.
I can't afford to wait any longer. If I miss this opportunity.
She stopped herself thinking back on Henry's earlier statement and how right he was. She could not miss the opportunity to meet with the Duke of Wiltshire, for who knows how long he would be in London before he was off on his escapade around the world. The tension in the room is palpable as Mr. Winslow looks away, his silence speaking volumes. Winslow.
Very well, Eliza, you're right. I've been neglectful, and it's time I fulfill my responsibilities.
Eliza's expression softens slightly, her eyes searching her father's face for sincerity.
Thank you, Father. We need you tonight, more than ever.
Mr. Winslow nods, a flicker of determination in his eyes.
Jenkins!
Mr. Winslow called. Jenkins, a middle-aged man with a dignified demeanour with a well-groomed appearance, neatly trimmed hair, and a clean-shaven face. His posture is upright, reflecting years of service and discipline. Enters the room promptly, bowing respectfully. Jenkins.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Winslow.
Help me prepare for the ball. I must make a proper appearance for my daughter's sake.
Jenkins nods, understanding the gravity of the situation.
Of course, sir. Right away.
As Mr. Winslow follows Jenkins up the stairs, Eliza's expression softens, a glimmer of hope rekindling within her. Henry observes quietly, a sense of relief washing over him.
Well managed, Eliza,
he said in a bantering tone.
Oh, hush,
she said, turning her gaze back to the stairs in hopes of seeing her mother coming down. She whispered to herself when there was no sight of their mother.
I cannot fathom what could be causing such a delay.
As the Winslows' carriage pulled up to the Fairchild house, they arrived a little later than anticipated, primarily due to Mrs. Winslow taking extra time to get dressed for the evening's affair. The delay, however, allowed them to approach the estate during the picturesque twilight hour, enhancing the beauty of their arrival. Despite the slight lateness, the Winslows were greeted by the same impressive sight as they stepped out of their carriage. They were met by the sound of chirping birds and the distant rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The air was fragrant with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass, also mingling with the distant strains of music emanating from within the house. A footman, impeccably dressed in livery, descended the steps to greet them with a polite bow. Behind him, the imposing butler, Mr. Fairfax, awaited at the entrance, his demeanour exuding formality and discretion. From the carriage, the Winslows observed the bustling activity of the household staff going about their duties. Servants hurriedly crossed the courtyard, carrying trays of polished silverware or attending to the horses in the nearby stables. In the distance, the sun began its descent, casting a golden glow upon the estate and bathing the surroundings in a warm, ethereal light. The Winslows couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation and curiosity as they prepared to enter the Fairchild house, knowing that within those walls lay the promise of a memorable evening filled with elegance and refinement. Mrs. Winslow, resplendent in her elegant gown adorned with lace and ribbons, was assisted by the footman to alight gracefully from the carriage. Her husband, Mr. Winslow, adjusted his coat and straightened his cravat before stepping onto the gravel path leading to the mansion. As they followed the footman up the steps, Mrs. Winslow couldn't help but admire the intricately designed facade of the mansion, its windows aglow with warm light from within. She exchanged a glance with her husband, both sharing a sense of excitement and anticipation for the evening's festivities. Despite the delay caused by Mrs. Winslow's preparations, the timing of their arrival seemed serendipitous, adding a touch of drama and elegance to their entrance into the Fairchild house. As Eliza Winslow was accompanied by her brother Henry to the entrance of the Fairchild house, they arrived fashionably late, much to the anticipation of the assembled guests. Eliza's gown, meticulously crafted by a talented seamstress, was nothing short of breathtaking. The dress featured an intricate lace bodice adorned with delicate embroidery, cascading into layers of silk chiffon that flowed elegantly to the floor. The soft hue of lavender complemented Eliza's complexion, enhancing her natural beauty. As Eliza and Henry entered the grand ballroom, heads turned and conversations faltered as guests caught sight of her stunning attire. The Duke of Wiltshire, a distinguished guest known for his discerning taste, paused mid-conversation, his gaze fixed upon Eliza with undisguised admiration. Eliza's gown was a topic of hushed conversation among the guests, particularly as rumours circulated about the Winslow family's recent financial setbacks. How could Eliza's mother afford such an exquisite dress amidst their supposed money problems? Some speculated that Mrs. Winslow had made sacrifices or sought assistance from an unknown benefactor to ensure her daughter's appearance at the prestigious event. As Eliza gracefully navigated the ballroom, her eyes met those of the Duke of Wiltshire. The moment seemed to freeze as they locked gazes across the crowded room, a silent exchange of curiosity and intrigue passing between them. Meanwhile, Henry discreetly observed his sister's interactions, noticing the subtle nuances in her demeanour as she engaged with various guests. Despite the family's financial challenges, Eliza carried herself with poise and confidence, her elegance and charm captivating those around her. The evening unfolded with music and laughter, but the lingering glances between Eliza and the Duke hinted at a potential connection that transcended the glamour of the event. Amidst the opulence and social dynamics of the ball, as Eliza's eyes met those of the Duke of Wiltshire's heir across the crowded ballroom, a silent narrative of intrigue and possibility unfolded between them. There was something enigmatic about him, his aloof demeanour, the way his gaze held a hint of mystery that both intrigued and unsettled her. Before Eliza could dwell further on her thoughts, a voice suddenly spoke from behind her, drawing her attention away from the Duke.
Intriguing, isn't he?
Eliza turned to see Mrs. Harrington standing beside her, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Mrs. Harrington's eyes were fixed on the Duke, her expression a mix of curiosity and amusement. Eliza hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She knew Mrs. Harrington was always one step ahead in the social games of London's elite, often privy to secrets and gossip that circulated within high society. Yes, indeed, Eliza replied cautiously, her gaze returning briefly to the Duke before meeting Mrs. Harrington's eyes again.
He seems mysterious.
Mrs. Harrington chuckled softly, her voice low and conspiratorial. Oh, my dear Eliza, mystery can be quite alluring, don't you think? But be wary of those who hide too much behind their charm. Eliza nodded, sensing there was more to Mrs. Harrington's words than met the eye. She couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay beneath the Duke's composed facade and why Mrs. Harrington seemed so interested in him. What secrets does Mrs. Harrington hold over Mr. Winslow? And how will Eliza navigate the complex web of societal expectations and personal desires? Will Sir Henry find an interest his mother will approve of? Stay tuned for the next episode of Whispers of Oakwood Lane. Episode 3, The Ball of Secrets. As the grand ball hosted by Lady Fairchild unfolds, tensions and alliances come to the fore. Eliza Winslow finds herself entangled in conversations with Mrs. Harriet Harrington, who seems to relish making her uncomfortable. Just as the pressure becomes unbearable, Mr. James Thornton, a gentleman with a less than handsome appearance but hidden wealth, steps in to rescue her from Mrs. Harrington's veiled barbs. Their conversation reveals a shared history between Mr. Thornton and Mrs. Harrington, one tinged with mutual disdain. Across the ballroom, Amelia Harrington engages in lively conversation with the Duke of Wiltshire's heir, Mr. Percy, whose enigmatic presence captivates the attendees. Eliza's jealousy is palpable as she watches their interaction, her focus wavering even as she dances with Mr. Thornton. He notices her distraction and, with a mix of bluntness and respect, confronts her about her evident interest in Mr. Percy. leaving Eliza feeling chastised and introspective. Meanwhile, Mrs. Winslow observes her husband, Mr. Winslow, in an intense and uncomfortable conversation with Mrs. Harrington. The scene catches Henry's eye as well, drawing his attention away from an overly enthusiastic young lady. As Eliza twirls across the dance floor with another gentleman, Mr. Edward Smythe, her gaze repeatedly drifts towards her father and Mrs. Harrington, the tension between them hinting at deeper, dangerous secrets.